At this very moment, I'm conveying information to you through multiple languages, that being English audio, Western signs, and, if you've got subtitles on, English writing. And you're receiving this information because you can intelligibly and consciously understand these languages. That's what language is. It's the exchange of information from one entity to another through mutually understood signs. And DNA, my friends, isn't that. This is DNA is a Language Debunked. The argument from DNA is very rarely presented in its syllogistic form. Rather, it's just asserted. In one way or another, its proponents simply claim that language is always a product of a mind, and that since DNA is a language, it too must be a product of a mind. And that mind is, wouldn't you know, the super specific God that they just so happen to believe in. Amazing, right? For example, Ken Ham puts it this way.
The evidence to me that just cries out that there's a God is the study of DNA. Scientists know today that languages, a code, only come from an intelligence, and information only comes from information. Nobody's ever seen matter by itself give rise to a code. Nobody's ever seen matter by itself give rise to information.
And Lee Strobel puts it this way.
What is DNA? It is a message with content. It is a language. Just like English uses a 26-letter alphabet, DNA uses a 4-letter chemical alphabet. In fact, inside every cell of the human body is as many words as you would find in thousands of editions of your Sunday newspaper.
And, to provide but one more example, when scientists first successfully mapped the human genome, Bill Clinton put it this way.
Today we are learning the language in which God created life.
Now, as previously expressed, these are just assertions, but if they were put into a syllogistic form, they would go as follows. Language is a product of a mind. DNA is a language. Therefore, DNA is a product of a mind. So, to get straight to it, even if this argument was valid, it would not logically follow that a specific God or group of gods exist. Nor would it logically follow that whatever created DNA still exists, that it is/was benevolent, or that it also created the universe. Seriously, all it would prove is that DNA had an author or authors, and that's it. It isn't an argument for Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, or indeed any religion. And hence, in the words of Hitchens, even if you've established deism, you've still got all of your work ahead of you to be a theist. Now, with that point made, I'll now explain why the argument isn't valid, and I'll start by completely and utterly crushing it with one swift sentence. The assertion that DNA is a language is an equivocation fallacy, because its proponents switch between two different definitions of the word language throughout their premises, and thus, their argument is incoherent and therefore invalid. To put this as simply as possible, during premise 1 and 3, they are using a communicational definition of the word language, which is a method of communication in which intended information is conveyed from one entity or group to another through the use of mutually understood signs and semiotic rules. But during premise 2, they are using a programming definition of the word language, which is a set of rules that instruct elements on how to function and behave. Now granted, on the surface these two definitions seem fairly synonymous, but in actuality they're not. The main difference between them is that the communicational definition necessitates that a mind receive, interpret and decipher information, and thus it necessarily infers intelligence, while the programming definition does not necessitate that a mind receive, interpret and decipher information, and thus it does not infer intelligence. Or, to put it more clearly, unlike English, math and this video, DNA code isn't interpreted by anything. It's a set of rules and instructions that follow the physical laws of nature. It's a chemical reaction. There's no mind receiving the information, there's no mind deciphering the information, and there's no decision making taking place. It's not a communicational language, it's a programming language that can be compared to, though not perfectly, computer coding. Just as computer codes are rules that instruct elements on how to function and behave, DNA codes are rules that instruct cells on how to function and behave. But the difference between the two, And this is the crux of the confusion, is that computer code is written by an intelligent designer, that being a human, while DNA code is written by natural selection, that being nature unconsciously determining which codes remain in the gene pool. Therefore, if one accepts natural selection, then, by extension, they accept that DNA code is determined by natural processes. They accept that, contrary to Ham's assertion, programming language can, and does, come from natural, unconscious processes. And if one doesn't accept natural selection, then, well, they're committing the creationists' all-time favourite personal incredulity fallacy. They're asserting that natural selection is false because they don't personally understand how it works, or they're unfortunately outright lying. It's sad, but many of these people make a great deal of money pretending that natural selection isn't overwhelmingly supported by every branch of science that it encounters. But pray as they might, and preach as they do, nothing is going to change reality. And that reality, my friends, is natural selection. Make no mistake about it. DNA is a set of rules and instructions that follow the physical laws of nature, and the author of these instructions is natural selection. Moving on, and to cover all bases, if the proponent instead insists on using exclusively the communicational definition of the word language throughout their argument, then their second premise is false, because in this sense of the word, DNA is not a language, because it's not a method of communication. It's not interpreted by anything. And if, on the other hand, the proponent insists on using exclusively the programming definition of the word language throughout their argument, then their first premise is false, because in this sense of the word, the assertion that language is always a product of a mind is unsubstantiated. In fact, it's an argument from ignorance, and further still, it's an argument from ignorance that natural selection has completely demolished. Anyhow, to recap, the argument from DNA is flawed because, even if valid, all it would prove is that DNA had an author or authors. Or in other words, it doesn't support a specific religion. And it isn't valid because its proponents either commit an equivocation fallacy or commit a personal incredulity fallacy. As always, thank you kindly for the view, and I'll leave you with this poetic quote from Richard Dawkins. DNA neither cares nor knows, DNA just is, and we dance to its music.